what's that book I got? The Russian guy? Stalin. I got that. I'm reading that. A lot of different things, but mostly shit on what built generals and what made countries and what.
Peace, family. We are back again, and today we must build on the JFK files, right? It's 80,000 pages of the JFK files that were just released by the President Donald Trump. He said he did it on RFK's behalf. That's what he said, you know what I mean? But he did stay true to his word and release those files. And it's 80,000 pages of files, right? And we're going to deal with a couple things that we took from it. Now, mind you, this 80,000 page file document is not all, right? It's still more to come. But they only released 80,000 so far. So we're going to just deal with these things, these key takeaways, right? And one of the key takeaways was that many of us already knew, right? I understand many didn't, but it was more of a confirmation to what we already knew. So what we found out is that JFK wanted to kind of go against the Federal Reserve. He didn't like the grip that they had on the U.S. currency, right? So this was similar to Abraham Lincoln, who was also assassinated, right? Now, that was a thing that many of us have always said in the conscious community, right? That JFK and Lincoln were assassinated for going against the Federal Reserve, right? Because they did not like the grips that the Federal Reserve had on the U.S. currency, right? Lincoln tried to do the greenbacks to get around that, right? And JFK also made an attempt to get around that also, and they were both assassinated. So that was confirmed. That was confirmed, not the Lincoln part, but the JFK part, right? That in those documents that he did not like the grips that that the Federal Reserve part itself had on the U.S. currency. He also didn't want Israel to have nukes, right? And he didn't care for APEC, what's today called APEC, right? So he had a lot of pushback, what it seems, against Israel, right? For whatever reason at that time, he had a lot of pushback against Israel, right? That's one thing that's in these documents. Right? 80,000 page document. Those are one thing that we must highlight, right? First off, now I know a lot of people are looking at these files and they are trying to find out more information about the assassination, which is what it was released for. But to me, from what I've seen, it's not much given too much indication on that. Some people feel that Oswald was still a lone shooter, while many are saying that, he couldn't have been a lone shooter. So for those looking for that side of the JFK file, I don't know if they fully got what they were looking for, right? But another thing that I wanted to branch off into was that in these 80,000 page files of documents was also Operation Mongoose, right? Which dealt with the assassination of Fidel Castro, the Cuban leader, right? So the assassination of Fidel Castro, the Cuban leader, talks of it, right? How to go about it, following him, tracking him, right? We must look into that, because that right there is an indication, and that confirms what I have always told you, right? Malcolm was taken out because of his communist ideologies. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was his communist ideologies and him beginning to connect with communist leaders worldwide. This is what I've always told you. If you follow me on my pages on X, right? This is what I've always told you. And this And the way that they followed Castro, who did Castro meet with? Malcolm X in New York City, right? Now we know all black leaders at that time were followed and tracked, including MLK, who was also a communist. People forget that. Martin Luther King had communist ideologies also. Many people forget that, right? Patrice Lumumba, who was taken out by who? They have a good documentary series on it on Amazon Prime you should check out, right? So black leaders, many black leaders who were into communism were a threat, just like Fidel Castro. You think that Fidel Castro was the only communist leader that was a threat and followed around and they wanted to take out? No, no sir, no sir, right? In this 80,000 page document, uh, tells us that and confirms that to us, right? Fred Hampton, all of the Black Panthers, dismantling the Black Panthers. Why? The Black Panthers were communists. They had Chairman Mao books. They hated capitalism. They robbed banks. They took the money back to the poor. They robbed drug dealers. They robbed pimps. They hated capitalism, right? They hated the rich. They hated the rich. This is why you see early Tupac banging on Donald Trump. He was taught that as a baby cub to hate the rich, right? So you have to understand that this 80,000 page document gives us a look into how the CIA was moving at that time towards any person, any leader that was communist. They were a threat if they had a big voice, right? And the Panthers were dismantled, taken out, right? So as we looking at in that file and we see the following of Fidel Castro, and Castro met with black leaders in America, and the way that they wanted to take him out, you don't think that they also wanted to take out people that he was in connection with in the States? I think you better think again. So when when people wondered did the nation take out Malcolm, no, they did not. No, they did not. The same people that were in attempt to take out Castro also more than likely took out Malcolm. They rent out places before you. They follow you around. Remember, you got to remember that Malcolm said that the nation didn't follow him to Mecca, but the CIA did. That's what he said, right? So you have to understand this. They were all under surveillance. Dr. King's house, Dr. King's hotels were under surveillance. They were all surveillance. They were all watched. And as we look into the JFK files, even though it has nothing to do with the JFK assassination attempt specifically, when we look into the Operation Mongoose and the attempt to take out Castro and the followings way they did Castro, we understand that they did many of the black leaders the same way, except the black leaders were not as protected as a Fidel Castro, and they were able to be taken out. Right? That's one thing that I learned. I learned from this 80,000. That's one of my takeaways from the 80,000 page document that was released on the JFK files. Right? That's just one of the ways that I have seen it. You know what I mean? Now, many people who want to look through these files, I think it's worth a look. It's worth a look into if you're into this type of information, right? It's definitely like for the historians or the conspiracy theorists, it's something for them to piece together, But again, the key takeaways before we wrap this one up is that Kennedy had issues with Israel getting those nukes. Kennedy had issues with what's today APEC having Israel having any type of influence in America's elections or politics in general. right? He had pushback on that. He didn't like that. That was in these files, right? And then um, he didn't like the Federal Reserve having grips on the U.S. currency, just like Lincoln, right? And both of those presidents were assassinated, right? They were assassinated. Now, also to summarize it again, on the back end, we looked into Operation Mongoose, which dealt with Fidel Castro, which is also in this 80,000 page document, and we see that the way that the CIA followed and tracked and made attempts, you know, on Fidel Castro, we also have to understand that they also more than likely did that with people that in the black, as far as black leaders go, that admired Fidel Castro, that met with Fidel Castro, like a Malcolm X, right? MLK, who was a known communist. When MLK was assassinated later on, they tried to give him a holiday. Many, you might not know this, but many states didn't want to celebrate Dr. King's Day. They seen him as a communist traitor. Have to understand that, right? The Panthers had Chairman Mao books. Again, these were communists. These were all seen as threats. Um, Albert Hitchcock, when you watch Albert Hitchcock's classic Birds, you have to understand that those birds symbolize a communist invasion. That's how many of us 90s babies, right? We don't understand that at one time in America during the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, you got to talk to some of the older guys. They'll realize that communist societies, communist styles of government were feared in America, right? Just that even that having that ideology, or let alone standing with them publicly. So those are some of my takeaways from these files, right? Uh, I would encourage you to look for yourself, right? To see what you take away, right? But this is just the first batch. As crazy as it sounds, there's going to be more coming out. But to wrap this one up, it's one thing that we must touch on briefly, in a little more detail, right? You have to understand that Malcolm and Elijah, right? The Malcolm and Elijah issue. You have to understand this. Many people blamed the nation for the assassination of Malcolm for many years, right? And you have to understand that the mistake that the nation made was publicly getting into it with Malcolm, right? That was the mistake that the nation in Malcolm made, right? Taking the issues into the public eye. Because while the CIA was getting surveillance on both of them, but mostly watching Malcolm because Malcolm was connecting with communist leaders worldwide now, right? It gave a lane for them to hit him. And then years later, when you look at Tupac, right? When Tupac shot the police officers in Atlanta, Georgia, that put Tupac on the map of the CIA also, right? That put Tupac on the eye of the CIA also. And when they dug into Tupac's background, they seen that he's not an ordinary rapper. He's connected to Geronimo Pratt. He's connected to Mutulu Shakur. He's connected to Afeni Shakur. He's connected to political prisoners, right? He also makes music about shooting police officers, right? He also has now a reputation for shooting police officers and getting away with it. Do you understand that? Now, when Tupac made the same mistake that pardon self, he made the same mistake that Malcolm made in the sense of getting into a public back and forth, a public dispute that the whole world knew about, right? This also would give entrance for the CIA to be able to put surveillance on Pac and hit Pac in his public dispute with Big, right? And as we have seen, when you seen Kanye call Diddy what? A Fed. He called Diddy a Fed. That's what he called him, you know. And on that note, we're gonna leave you with that. But also keep in mind, because I say that to say, I didn't lay down the foundation as much as I should have, but I felt like I needed to add this on. Tupac is a Cub. The Cubs were baby Panthers, right? So Tupac had communist views also and was connected to political prisoners, like Mutulu Shakur, like Geronimo Pratt, like Afeni Shakur, and even had ties to Assata Shakur. On that note, we are out, family. Peace.